Abiotic Factor is a phenomenal game with an incredible story and riveting gameplay. So much so that it has been nominated for Best Indie Game and PC Game of the Year by the Golden Joystick Awards. In this video, we're taking the camera out of bounds to look at very curious Easter eggs and really interesting details about this game. Directly above the main world, there's this black cube over here that has two very interesting things about it. The first one being, this is where the sleeping minigame takes place. Whenever we go to sleep, we get to see through the lenses of a camera that's positioned right in front of the sleeping minigame, which will then start calling in the paths and the background elements. The second really interesting thing is that this seems to be where the 3D models that show up in the crafting menu get instanced. They also seem to remain static until you open the crafting menu, and that's when they start a rotating animation. Notice that as I click on different items in the crafting menu, they show up in different locations in the background. The fact that each of these items seem to have their own locations gives the impression that all of them are instanced in this area all at once, except invisible until we're looking at them through the crafting menu. Were they to be visible all at once, we'd be able to see a big crowd of items all standing next to each other. Here's what the world looks like looking from above. After Lance drops you off at the facility, he'll drive back from where we came from. Here we can see that most of the drive is properly animated. Eventually, however, it reaches a point where the car just stops and stays in place. If we fly the camera into the car, we'll get the option to talk to Lance. However, he doesn't really say anything. Here's a closer look at what's inside the car. In the first cutscene, we could see multiple dead trees along the road. Interesting thing about these trees is that they're actually just one single tree, put underneath the ground, and what we're seeing are actually multiple branches of these trees, clipping through the ground. Here's a very interesting detail, not out of bounds related, but that I just found and I find is very cool. You can hear the cicadas and those bushes, and the fun fact is, if you get close, they actually go quiet. They know of your presence, and so they'll go silent, just like they do in real life. Very cool. Let's take a closer look at the details behind the counter in the reception area, none of which can be interacted with. First of all, we can see that this armory locker is riddled with stuff, mostly security gear and some ammo. We can see the guard is watching some sort of sport, soccer it seems to be. On this side, we've got the same laptop used throughout the game to look at emails, a shotgun, and a computer with a 3D pipe screensaver. And there's this very hidden detail on the desk, which is a picture frame sporting one of the paintings that you can acquire in-game. Another fun little detail is that when you interact with the intercom and Jackson teleports to the window, the pistol that he carries by his waist actually stays on the chair, waiting for him to teleport back. And what's really interesting is that behind all of the security cameras, there are actually the models for the plug strip and the plug board. Now the interesting thing is that these don't actually look like the plug strips and plug boards that we can place down, but they look like their models in the crafting menu. If we clip inside before having Jackson open the door for us, we can see that there's a data not found interactable right here. This is where Jackson will appear right after opening the shutters to see who it is on the other side of the door. However, let's see what happens if we open the shutters and the window ourselves first. As we interact with the intercom, we can see Jackson teleport by the window, and confirm that the data not found interactable actually does belong to him. Here, Jackson would normally be opening the shutters and then closing them, but because we did it first, the game is triggering the event in reverse. Because the window now remains open, we can see Jackson teleport back to his counter. The reason we could see the data not found interactable is because the game never actually opens the glass window, only the shutters, and we opened both the window and the shutters, allowing us to interact with Jackson. Let's see what this looks like from the other side. Now let's take a look at the inaccessible areas in this room. Right here is a locked door that cannot be opened from either side, and behind it is a maintenance access door, which is also locked. However, you can unlock it from the outside, but it just reveals a solid wall. Going down the elevator will reveal multiple floors before we get to our destination. Let's take a closer look at what they look like. Inside the first one, there's a couple of NPCs. We can see that all of them are specified as data not found, but none of them will say anything if you try to speak to them. None of the furniture in here is packageable either, with the exception of this huge file cabinet, which we can actually open to find items inside, which is very interesting to me. On the sides there are these rooms that have no walls, ceiling, or doors, and are also lit up. When going down the elevator, we can see these light rays, as if there's some sort of spotlight over here. However, that's not the case. Right here is a sign pointing towards the Synaptic Labs, which might give us an idea of where we are positioned in the facility. Considering at the entrance to the reactor sector, there is also one of these signs pointing towards the Synaptic Labs, which is inaccessible with some debris. Considering the angle of the arrow, I think it's safe to assume that normally there would be a staircase here. However, because this area is never actually visible from the elevator, the devs never really had to put one. On the opposite side, we can see that there will be a kitchen that way, and if we go down this staircase, we would be led towards the Crus's study. We can also see that the computer doesn't actually have anything on screen. If we keep going down, we'll come across this other area. You can see that there's a meeting going on, and again, none of these scientists can actually be talked to despite being interactable. And these file cabinets can actually be interacted with. By far, the most interesting detail about this floor is if we actually clip into the vents, there seems to be a man hiding in here. It also says data not found, and you can't speak with them either. This is presumably an Easter egg that you can spot if you have a very keen eye while going down the elevator and look right through the vents. You can see him in the very distance there. He also seems to have some sort of bracelet or watch. There's also this security bot over here that cannot be triggered even if we attack it. Right next to it, we can find another data not found NPC, and a door that cannot be interacted with. Behind it is simply nothing. Next to the vending machines, there's also an empty room with no walls or ceiling and also lit up. And past this room is some furniture that can also not be packaged. Right next to this, we have two NPCs that can also not be talked to, and a platform car that cannot be interacted with. And finally, there's another door over here which is not interactable with, another NPC that cannot be spoken to. On the other side, there's also just a tiny room, and this car that cannot be interacted with either. Continuing our journey, we're led to this area where we can see some guards escorting the behemoth. Amongst these NPCs, the security bot is actually the only one that can be interacted with, alongside the behemoth. In this water section, there's a ladder that cannot be interacted with either. You can't actually climb it. Finally, we reach our destination, where we first meet Bruce. If we take the camera up to where he is, we can see that there's actually a switch here that turns on the lights. Laser right next to Bruce takes us to this tiny space with a huge black plane, which I'm not really sure what it's used for. Here's a wider look at this plane. If we go the opposite way, we'll be led into this room where there are two other NPCs that can be interacted with, but don't actually speak. These scientists seem to be watching our performance. Finally, to close off this room, we can see there's an entrance into the order storage. There's a keypad right next to it that we can interact with, but hacking it doesn't actually do anything. However, we can clip through this gate and take a look at the enormous warehouse that they've got over here. Talking to the NPCs will result in the same as always, data not found. They don't actually say anything, but there is an email terminal that you can use and look at, with the message, "You are accessing the Gate Internet email server, for employee eyes only." I'm unsure if this is an Easter egg or just some placeholder text, but it's very interesting nonetheless. What's also interesting is that once you log out, the screen actually turns into the Gate logo instead of just being blue like it initially was. Here's another forklift that cannot be interacted with, and two more NPCs that you can really speak to. Over to the left side, we've got a big gate over here that leads us nowhere, and a small red door that cannot be interacted with. All of the crates found in here can actually be broken either, despite being the same model where we can find resources throughout the game. Another detail I noticed is that there are also these light orbs in the air, a few meters from each other. If I turn off the fog, they actually go away as well. They seem to be aligned with these light spots, so I wonder if they're just the origin of each light. Now let's move on to the next room. Typically we would go through the vent, but let's clip through here instead, to find another Bruce. Same Bruce as before. And it's interesting that he's up here because when you're in that vent, you cannot actually look at him. So it's probably just for directional audio purposes. This room can never be accessed otherwise, and for the same reason we can see that this ladder doesn't actually work and doesn't even have a collision. Moving on to the next area, we'll be met with this office space, which despite being inaccessible, there's some interesting tidbits about it, such as this strange desk photo right here. This desk photo can never be found in the actual game, but here you can package it, pick it up, same as the other furniture. Everything in here is packageable. You can search the desk to find some items inside. You can search this vintage cabinet for the same thing, the trash bin as well, and even this file cabinet. There are also these two paintings that you can package, but they can also be found during the game. You also have this big door, which can be unlocked from this side, so it would typically be locked from the other side, to find Bruce yet again. Speaking to him right here will just trigger his normal dialogue of when you're down there, so we're not going to do that. Over here you can find his little tray and what's in it. Get a closer look to that. This is the last room in the tutorial. Let's take a look at what's out of bounds here. You can find this door saying caution radiation that cannot be interacted with, and on the other side there's also nothing but a wall. We go down the stairs. We can see that they are actually usable. No, they're not. There's a ladder here that cannot be interacted with, and at the bottom we have a forklift, some barrels, and these huge containers. Finally, there's also this gate leading to the order warehouse. One of the first rooms you'll come across is Warren's security booth in the office sector. If we take the camera inside, we can see it's actually got a bunch of items on these shelves, although they're not interactable, except the ones on the very top shelf. This plant over here is packageable, even though the rest of the furniture isn't. The funniest detail about this room is that they actually even included a poop bucket with a little poop inside. And taking the camera inside the poo, we can see that it doesn't have any backface culling. On the third floor of the office sector, there is this empty room with a glass window that you can look through. I've always been curious if there's anything on the other side right around the corner, but the door is locked from both sides so you can never actually get in. But taking the camera inside the room shows us that it is literally just an empty room, and going around the corner just brings us to a dead end with a black plane. Right outside the security hub in the office sector, there's this forklift certification training poster on the wall. The location where this picture was taken is actually from the warehouse that we saw back in the tutorial. After releasing the Wayseeker and going through the big pink portal, you'll end up in the Far Gardens again, where a new portal awaits you that'll take you to the Praetorium. If we happen to fly over here at the very beginning of the game, we can confirm that the portal does not show up until we leave Shadowgate. In the library in Flathill, there's a tall door which cannot be opened, leaving a large area inaccessible by normal means. If we clip through, we can verify that this door cannot be unlocked from the other side either. Let's take a look at what the inside of this area looks like. We can see there's a composer inside just standing still who also does an aggro on you. And there's another composer sitting right here that also does not react to you. You can actually see both of these composers through the window. One over here and the other right there. We can also verify that none of the furniture inside can be packaged. Here's what the underneath of the staircase looks like. Outside the map, there's this basketball court, and what's really interesting about it is that the way they made the basketball hoops was by just using a street lamp and a flattened out cube. Inside one of the first rooms in Flathill, there's a dead soldier leaning against this door. If we look through the door window, we can see that there's actually a composer sitting on the inside. Let's take a closer look. And observe that there's some bloodstains on the ground and some fog surrounding this composer. We can also see that these doors are actually not interactable with at all. Past this composer is also a massive area we never actually get to explore. None of these doors are interactable, but if we go up this staircase and through this hallway, we'll be led to a red door that's locked from both sides, and it leads us to a room in a playable area. Inside this building, there's also this light spot over here, which I can only assume was left over by accident. Right by the library, there's this locked door which cannot be opened from either side. Inside is just a small empty room. By the library, there's also these gates that are locked from both sides. This takes us out of bounds, where there's a couple of cars and these trucks. This kind of truck typically lets you open the back side of it, but it's not the case with these ones. This truck here is a little different, where the back side of it is somewhat open, and we can see that it's about to fall from the parking lot. This is giving really strong Silent Hill vibes, and I love it. Now this area is technically not out of bounds since it can be accessed with items such as a jetpack or the bouncing pad, but I figured it's hidden enough that I talk about it as well. Inside this room you can find a unique type of rug, a door that doesn't lead you anywhere and it's locked from both sides, and a few more furniture items. Close by there's also this inaccessible building with these doors that are not interactable with, and a small empty room on the inside. To finish off Flathills, I'd like to do a flyover for you, but without any of the fog. In the Torii world, there's a puzzle you can solve to open up the secret entrance. If we go through it, we'll find a small room with a gate. However, there's nothing behind it. Alright, so funny thing, before we jump into this one, I actually finished this video last night, but Abiotic Factor 1.1 just came out, which added this homeworld, this green portal you see right here. So everything else that you see in the video is from 1.0. This part specifically is the only new thing that I'm showing now in the video because, yeah, the update came out right before I was about to upload a video to YouTube. So, enjoy! Before we head into the new homeworld, there seems to already be a holiday portal in the works, at least judging by these snow particles. Right now, however, let's head into the Stone Garden Temple. Now, there's not a whole lot to see in this new homeworld, but what I immediately want to show you is this very interesting crash site that happened down by this river. We've got a skeleton which indicates this incident happened a good while ago, an Order helmet right beside it, as well as a banner from the Order, implying the faction this corpse was a part of. Finally, here's a look at the crashed down helicopter. Funny thing about the water is that there seems to be two planes of water, one above the ground and another one below. And there are also two suns, one up above and one down below. Just like Torii, this homeworld also has its own secret puzzle. After you solve it, you'll be able to open up this wall to reveal a new room with a very interesting item that you can package, an arcane mechanism. Some other items you can get in here are this wax tablet, a garden duck, a golden wreath crown, and a garden bird. An interesting environmental storytelling detail is that while most petrified characters seem to be ancient soldiers, there also seem to be some petrified scientists who were clearly terrified and running away from whatever turned them into stone. In the manufacturing sector, you may come across this collapsed elevator. The game allows you to take a peek inside, but we can actually take a closer look. Taking the camera inside the elevator, we can see that there's a bunch of dead soldiers and crystalisks, the crystal enemies that can become invisible, and for some reason most of these soldiers don't even have heads or limbs. You've got to wonder why they were all in here together. If we take the camera right outside the mapping center, we can find this lone wall and floor tiles. One of our objectives in the manufacturing sector is to get to the surface level through a road that goes through the mines. However, we end up getting disappointed as the whole tunnel has collapsed. If you were ever curious about what's on the other side of this debris, it is all just void. Here's what happens when you're right next to the synchrotron as you destroy it. This is what the passage to labs looks like before destroying the synchrotron. Now I've got a question for you. When do you first encounter these volatile pests? If you said the reactors, wrong! That is because the first time you see them is actually in the rundown version of the tutorial section, right over there. Speaking of which, let's take a look at the before and after of this area. If you go through this portal, you'll be taken into the introduction sector post-incident. Remember this room? Well, it turns out it is actually accessible, and as such, this ladder can now be used. This is also why this office space was present and could be interacted with in the tutorial. We can see that most of everything is the same, except for this photo frame, which now shows a dog instead of the strange photo. This also explains why this door is unlockable, and if we walk through it, we can see that the area where Bruce was previously standing has now collapsed. Down here, we can see the stand where Bruce's tray was resting on, and we can even see the tray itself buried in the debris. Curiously, the floor is actually different in the main game than it was in the tutorial. Another difference is that this vent is now blocked off with debris, and if we step outside, there's a window through which you'd typically be able to see the order warehouse, but it's now just blacked out. If we go through these locked doors, we can see this area is now overgrown by alien vegetation. The computer we could interact with during the tutorial is now off, and the room where you could find a Dr. Mant's recording is gone. Past this debris would normally be the room where Bruce teaches you about the game's power system. We can also see that these signs don't have anything written on them, as opposed to in the tutorial area. Interesting tidbit is that this volatile pass doesn't actually aggro on you or die. Finally, taking the camera outside will show us that all the surrounding rooms present in the tutorial were completely removed from this section in the main game. After we climb down this ladder in the train, there's this locked door right here. If we clip through, we can see that none of this furniture is packageable. Although it may appear so, the train doesn't actually ever move. What creates the illusion of movement is the way the textures and the grass shader are animated. Also, fun fact, this electrical piece on the train is actually just a Tesla coil. We can even see the outlet over here. When you first reach the lab sector, you'll be met with this cutscene. Janet and I will eventually run into that room, so let's see what that looks like.
Oh no, Janet!
Oh my god, it's loose.
Run, Janet! Run, Janet!
Before and during the cutscene, none of these characters can be interacted with. The first time you come across a small security booth in the lab sector, you'll find Dr. Thule, who as you may know has a huge addiction to coffee. We can confirm this especially if we take the camera inside to find 6 empty mugs of coffee.
Did you happen to find any coffee?
Case in point. Inside this room you can also find this chair leaning against the door, indicating that Dr. Thule barricaded himself inside. The second time you'll come across the volatile pest is going to be in the labs, inside this room with a bunch of capsules containing creatures and body parts inside, with the volatile pest being in one of the first capsules you'll run into. However, this isn't the only enemy you can encounter early, as there are also snow pests inside some of these capsules, such as this one. These pests can be found later in the game in the residence sector. This discovery was very interesting to me as it can basically be considered foreshadowing. As you leave the adjustment wings in the lab sector, you'll come across these void holes that if you fall into, you'll immediately die. Let's take a look at what they look like on the inside. It basically looks like we teleported to a whole new dimension with very pretty colors. But really what is happening, if we take the camera outside, it is actually just a big box with a shader on it. In the lab sector, you'll come across this small security checkpoint. Taking the camera inside will allow us to see what it looks like with a little bit more detail. Now this is by far one of the most interesting out-of-bounds discoveries in this video. I was fascinated by this one. When you get to the containment zone, you'll find IS-122. If you look inside, it's just a dark room. When you get into the room upstairs, you'll unlock a compendium entry about the Shadow Hopper. This entry reads, at all times when IS-122 is not being directly studied, the subject is to be kept in total darkness. Containment sites are required to be entirely unadorned with no decoration, furniture, or excrescences of any kind. When you look through the windows, you can see that it's all just pitch black, whether it be here or here. However, if you turn on a flashlight, you can see that there's something bobbing up and down. Now here's where things get really interesting. This door can never actually be open. It doesn't even bring up any sort of interface when you get close to it. But if you happen to get inside, this is what happens. You are killed. If we turn on God mode and no clip inside, we can see the exact moment where we die. This entire room is basically a kill box, and I think it's safe to assume that that is to simulate the monster inside killing us as we step inside. Speaking of the devil, there it is. Now we can take a closer look at what the monster looks like. It is hard to make out what it actually is. Initially I thought it was a hooded person where you can see the hood around and then there's just a nose in the center. But if we change the weather to fog, we actually get to see that it's just an anglerfish. And it is not only just an anglerfish, it is also just a sprite bobbing up and down of an anglerfish. Because if we move the camera behind it, it disappears. Now, I am unsure why they decided to use an anglerfish for this. I wonder if the Shadow Hopper is actually meant to just look like this, or if this was just some sort of a placeholder to give that effect of seemingly being something inside that you can really make out what it is when you look through the window. Another interesting thing about this room is that you can actually place any furniture on the floor or on the walls, except for the wall where the door is. Light sources also don't seem to light up any of the walls or the floor in this room, only slightly lighting up the monster. Next, we're going to be looking at the containment cell unit for IS-235, the tape wisp. Bringing the camera inside, we can see that there's a cassette at the very center with some black gunk leaking out of it. Same black gunk that's going up this wall, which was presumably left by the subject that resides within the tape. The furniture in this room can also not be packaged. And finally, there's this whiteboard with some sort of diagram that I can't make out what it's supposed to be, but it's apparently important, and Gates logo. The backside of the whiteboard is just completely blank. Directly above the tape wisp cell, we can actually find these 5 signs over here, which I can only assume were used for copy-pasting and putting them on the walls next to the cell doors, and then just swap the texture to match the characteristics of the subject within that cell. To keep the streak of contained entities, enter IS-64. This is a composer that's strapped within this containment cell unit in the lab sector, and there's a lot of interesting things to check out about this one. First one being, if we take the camera inside, we can see that this composer is actually different from the others because it is missing its little shoulder appendages, as seen in regular composers. These composer's appendages can actually be found in the lab sector as well, being studied in this machine. Another interesting thing about this room is that it's actually not entirely covered in fog. The devs only placed this ring of fog to give the illusion of the room being covered by fog when you look through the window outside. Presumably they used the rings so the player can have a clear view towards the composer when looking through the window. And you can also see that there's another ring of fog on the floor just to sell the effect a little bit more. Another really interesting subject is IS-127. If you take the camera inside, we can take a look at the room in more detail. We can also have a closer look at the snowman itself. If we go inside the containment unit, we can see that the snowman is just a pitch black figure. But what's really funny is if you go inside the snowman, you can see there's a whole skeleton. Not only that, but this is no ordinary skeleton. This is actually the model of the composer. Specifically the one contained in the labs, as besides sharing the same feet, legs, and hands, it also does not have the shoulder appendages either. Another interesting thing about this room is that if you go into the observation room just behind the snowman, you can see that there is a glass window that allows us to look inside. However, if we no-clip into the room again and look back, it is just a brick wall. Now you could argue that it's a one-way glass, but this could still be brick, which I thought was really funny. You can also sort of see a darker silhouette of the window on the wall. I initially found this intriguing because I thought you'd be able to see the window behind the snowman through the door, but it doesn't actually seem to be the case, as it would be completely behind the containment unit, and so I can see why the devs didn't bother actually putting a window here. Now this one specifically is not Out of Bounds related, but it is a little fun environmental storytelling detail. IS-10 is the glowing shard, but as you can see, the room is empty, and it's empty throughout the whole game. That is because the glowing shard can actually be found sitting underneath this dead scientist. If you cut up its body, you'll release it from its grasp, allowing you to pick it up and later turn it into the glowing shard, a trinket that reduces electricity damage and prevents Tesla coils from targeting you. Now I'll show you an up-close view of all the other locked and contained subjects. Right past the first few containment cells you'll come across, you'll find a containment block Torii, which is blocked by a flash webbing. Behind these doors is a Y-shaped corridor with a few cell doors. Taking the camera down into one of the doors, we can see that there's just a wall behind them, and they don't actually lead to any sort of room. Unfortunately, going any further than this will just unload the room. Immediately to the right of the Torii containment block, there's this entire flooded area. The water here is electrified, so if you happen to fall, it's immediate death. Let's take a closer look. For the sake of visibility, I turned off the underwater effects. So what can we find? There's a couple of containers, some chain link fence, a forklift, 2 sunken forklifts. If you go through these gates over here, it's just going to be void, and these 2 walls. Going back inside, we can find these 3 pipes, which one of them is burst, and this is really what caused the entire flood. And there's also these floating crates, which have the same design as the ones that you can break during the game to get resources. But if we actually try to break them, we can see that they are unbreakable. You cannot do anything to these crates. Now this is a very interesting one. This is where you first meet Dr. Khan, who you have to help escape from this containment cell unit, where he supposedly got himself stuck by accident. If we approach the door, we can try to open it to find that it's locked. However, if we actually go inside the room and try to open it from this side, you can actually unlock it and open it. Obviously, Dr. Khan doesn't try to escape, but I thought this was a very interesting detail about this door. However, this is actually not the only door you can do this with, as every other door in the containment cell unit can be opened from the inside as well. The only doors this doesn't apply to are the doors within this containment block, which cannot be interacted with at all from either side. However, what is really interesting is that the door for the cell containing the composer cannot actually be interacted with from the inside. This is because on the inside, it's actually not the same door. They're 2 doors stacked on top of each other. But if we can get the sweet spot, it is actually possible to unlock the door from the other side. There it is. And then we can open it, and we can see that there's actually a stretched out door behind it. Very, very curious as to why. My theory is because this cell is containing a composer, they had to make the wall a lot sturdier. And if you notice, the wall around the door, because it is a stretched out door, makes it seem like it's metal, whereas the other cells are all just a brick wall. So I believe the intention here might be to make it look sturdier than the others because the door is surrounded by metal. Near Dr. Khan's cell, there's also this very intriguing wall. Something clearly tried to escape from here but couldn't, and it might have piqued your curiosity at what might actually be on the other side of this wall. Unfortunately, there is nothing. Although I suppose that was to be expected, but still curious to look at nonetheless. If we clip into this containment block before we unlock these doors, we can observe that the zombies are actually stuck in this invisible box. They cannot cross to this side or to this side. This is presumably so the players cannot see the zombies roaming around this hallway if they look through the door before unlocking them, considering the first reveal of the zombies is in this room where you get to unlock the doors. Now here's one of the most fascinating discoveries that I found. At the very top level of the lab sector, after you hack the keypad for IS-855, you can go through the gate to find the mirror portal room, which basically takes you to a very large, flat grass world. What if I told you this place wasn't always meant to be here? Right by the room where the Tarrasque first spawns, if we turn to the left here, we'll find these 2 big gates. Behind this one, there's really nothing to look at. However, if you look through the window on this one, you'll see that it's just a dark room on the other side. Clipping through will reveal this hallway, which appears to be just a dead end. Or is it? Going further reveals what I assume is the original intended location for the mirror portal room. You can see that the walls aren't even textured here. And inside the mirror room, we can see the various layers of grass, simulating the elevated terrain in the real mirror room. As you can probably guess, trying to go inside the mirror doesn't actually do anything. Here's a better look of what the room looks like from the outside. Right beside it, there's also this floating small leftover wall. Another factor that leads me to believe that this was going to be the original location of the Mirror World room is the fact that there's this big window on this gate here, whereas that gate doesn't have any. So you'd actually be able to look through it and see the mirror room on the other side. I believe this was also the reason why they simply put a black plane, so they didn't have to actually go ahead and delete the whole thing. Inside the Tarrasque room, there's also this window you can look through, and there's actually another Tarrasque over there, which is actually, I believe, the Behemoth. Now, I can't go very far in this room, unfortunately, because it just unloads it, so this is as much as we can get, but we can notice that there is some fire right there that shines for a little bit, but then disappears as it cools. And if we take the binoculars, we can take a closer look. We can see what's the Behemoth just, I guess, dying over there, which you would normally be able to see through the window as well. But we can also see that there's some debris over there. You can see that there's a room over here, which I unfortunately cannot get into, but I'm sure it's just going to be empty either way. There's also a gate over there, and well, this is really mostly of what you can see. Unfortunately, there's a lot of areas I would like to show you guys, and I would like to see myself, but going far enough will just unload the area immediately, and it does not allow me to actually go look up close at these details. In the room with the portal to Canaan, you can also find some capsules with elements from the Antiverse, like the Hex Tree and the Root Walls. Now let's take a look at the furniture store. These doors are locked from both sides, and the zombies cannot be hit. The same applies to this door over here. As expected, we can also see that none of these zombies actually aggro onto you if you're outside. None of the furniture outside is packageable. Here's a flyover of the whole town. Inside the Mycofields, there's actually not much to show at all. But something that perked my curiosity was, what does it look like when a scuttlebug hides in its den? Let's find out. He seems to simply bury himself inside and remain still, until he's ready to come out again. Something about the Mycofields that I was really excited to go look at was this floating island. But unfortunately, trying to get up there will eventually just unload the world, making it impossible to get to it. If somebody knows how to prevent that from happening, please let me know down in the comments. There's plenty of things I would love to be able to see, but I can't because the world will just unload. At one point in the game, your objective will be to activate the surface lift in the security sector to escape the facility. However, when we call the elevator, something goes terribly wrong. Let's see what happens inside the elevator shaft when the lift crashes. In the security sector, you'll eventually come across this room with a bunch of gear inside, and I've always wondered if there was some way to get in. The answer is no, but if we clip inside a room, we can actually verify that none of the furniture or items is interactable. And fun fact, there's also a bobblehead inside that you cannot interact with or pick up. However, this is the same bobblehead that you can find in the Warren security booth in the office sector. Another really interesting detail about this room is that if you turn off no clip, we are actually unable to walk around this area at all, which hasn't been the case with any other rooms so far. In the Night Realm, you can find a cell containing what appears to be a corrupted bogman. This door is locked, but if we clip inside a cell, we can actually unlock it from this side, just like the containment cell unit doors and lamps. Here's a closer look at the corrupted bogman. Attacking it will make it bleed, but nothing else really happens. Now here's a really spooky one. You'll come across this shade, which is the only one that will actually speak to you instead of just humming. So the interesting thing about him, and very creepy too, is that if we actually clip into his helmet, we can see that he's actually got a very wide grin on his face, just like Dr. Khan at the end of the game. This makes you wonder, could this be intended to be Khan? Think about it. Is the only one that can actually speak to you, and every other shade will just hum. Who else than Dr. Khan to actually have that sort of ability? When taking the tram between the Hydroplant and the office sector, you ride past this radioactive area. Let's take a closer look. We can see that this door is actually interactable, although locked from both sides. The radioactive waste, interestingly enough, doesn't actually make you sick, and it can also be walked on. At the Hydroplant sector, you'll find Janet and Abe hanging down on top of the submarine. A really easy to miss detail here is that in the back of the submarine, you'll actually be able to find Hello, their packed electropass, just being a little fella sitting on this chair. Look at how cute.
Time? You quantum entangled us?
This is how it looks from the outside. If you've ever wondered what Abe looks like inside the submarine, here it is. Now let's take a look at what the underwater section looks like when we turn off the underwater effects. Now we can take a closer look at the dark water beast. Curiously, it seems to light up its tentacles when you get close to it. Not really sure why. Another interesting fact is that when you get inside of it, your vision actually goes red. Here's what happens when you attack it. Now let's try and see if we can get it to attack us. That's terrifying. You can see the dark water beast does sometimes clip through the geometry underwater. After you leave the security sector, you'll be met with this button that opens that gate so you can proceed. However, before you can do that, you need to drain all the water that's on the other side. In order to do that, you must go up into this room and hack the keypad. Before we do that, let's take a look at what it looks like currently. As you can see, there are actually two planes of water. Here's what it looks like from above. Dr. Ken also mentions that if we drain the water, we're gonna be releasing the dark water beast into the Hydroplant sector. However, if we look under the water, there's actually no beast at all. In the Hydroplant sector, there's a secret room that you can reach through different means. If we go inside, we'll find this locked door that can't be opened by either side, and it leads nowhere. When you first reach the control room of the neutrino detector, you will find Dr. Quercy, a French scientist who escaped the Gate Voussoir facility after being raided by soldiers. She tells you about how she barely escaped with her life through the portal, and that she thought she would be safe here, which is clearly not the case. She will eventually tell you how she's thinking about crossing the water by swimming, which proves itself to be a terrible idea given after you complete the Voussoir facility, you can actually find her dead, deep underwater, presumably dragged down by the dark water beast. When you reach the Yeti cave in the Voussoir, you'll find his skeleton encased in ice. If we take a look inside, we'll be able to see it in more detail. What's really interesting is that there's actually a shifted skull as part of the skeleton, which is worn by some of the gatekeepers. There's a few more details we can find around here, such as the cable car buildings. The first one we can look at is at the top of this mountain. Unfortunately, we can't get too close, otherwise the world will unload. But with the binoculars, we can take a look at what the building looks like, observing that it's a very simple model, understandably so, since you can only really see it from a distance. Towards the bottom of the playable area, we can take a closer look at these cable cars, this one specifically being on fire. The inside is actually somewhat modeled and not back-face cold. And the same applies to every other cable car on this map. If we fly to the bottom here, we can actually take a look at the cable car building. Another interesting fact is that if you are able to safely get down here, the game actually allows you to walk around, and it doesn't kill you. You'll see this sign saying danger, death, which if you go past them and fall over there, you will die. However, there's actually an invisible wall over here that doesn't let you even get close to those. If we come over to the right side over here, there's this whole area that's flat. It would be great for a base if you can somehow bring cables on here. But going past these signs over here will immediately kill you. When we are about to reach the Yeti cave, we can see these two soldiers shooting something, presumably the Yeti. If we go around, we can see that they're actually not shooting anything at all. It's all just scripted. Right as you arrive in the Voussoir, you can see that there's this room over here behind these windows. If we go around to trying to find a door, there's going to be a bunch of debris. We can take the camera inside, see that the door is not interactable with from either side. Inside of the room is just an empty room. There's also these assets on the wall here, and what's interesting is that these two are actually not the same asset. The continuation of the first one you see that goes up is actually part of the same asset, but that is placed outside. When you go through the red portal in the Exer village, this is what you're met with. Terrifying. Let's take a closer look at what we got here. You got a gatekeeper banner, and right over here is a big Wayseeker. Let's see what it looks like from up close. From here, if we go directly down, we can also see the Exer village, meaning the Wayseeker area seems to be directly above the island. This is the only instance where you can actually reach the end of a skybox in the portal world. I was also really interested in checking out all these pillars, but unfortunately the world just unloads when I try to get close. The best we can do is use the binoculars to see what's on top of the pillar. And it seems to be some sort of like frozen structure? It's a sprite for sure that always follows wherever we're looking. At the entrance to the reactor sector, there's a synaptic lab sign with some debris blocking the hallway, which actually stands for a little bit. In the cloud reactor, there's actually a secret room that is accessible through normal play. Right by this waterfall of radioactive waste, drop down into this river, and go behind a waterfall to find a hidden room. Inside a hidden room, there's actually a secret room with Gus, the cockatiel, a bird that actually belongs to one of the developers. In the Dusk reactor, there is what seems to originally have been intended to be a shortcut that was then later scrapped and not included in the game. If you walk up to these red doors, you can see that they're locked, and there's really no way of going inside. However, if we no-clip through them, we'll find this ramp that goes down into the water. Now bear in mind, for the sake of this video, I do have underwater effects turned off, for the sake of visibility. But we can actually run across this tunnel, and there's this like very stretched ladder that we can still climb nonetheless. And we can climb down this next one, to find this room with a door that can actually be unlocked from this side, but would be locked from the other. If we open it, it brings us to this really long road. Going over this direction, we can see that there's just a dead end and we would fall into the void. But if we run in the other direction, we will eventually come across a really large gate. Now, to get through this gate, we'll have to no-clip again, but as you can see, it brings us to this whole room again. So this seems like it was originally intended to be a shortcut to move between that original hallway and this room. Ah, big attack. But it wound up just being scrapped from the game entirely. We are now in the Mist Reactor, which is heavily overgrown by alien vegetation. One terrifying detail about this room is that in the ceiling, there's actually this massive plant with huge sharp teeth. And what's really disgusting about it is that if you fly inside, there's this disgusting, throbbing, flesh-like webbing. Gross. Did you know that while in the Shadowgate dimension, the Sister of the Unlost actually watches us at all times? If you bring a pair of binoculars and look right through between those trees, we can look at the satellite dish and find her just sitting on the roof. Unfortunately, we can't actually take the camera right up to her, as the world will unload. But if we use the binoculars, we can take a look and confirm that it is indeed the Sister of the Unlost, just watching over us from the rooftops. When you reach the end of Shadowgate, you'll be met with the Wayseeker. Let's get a closer look at this. After destroying the containment devices, the Wayseeker will lean back outside of the player's vision until the animation stops and it just disappears, leaving behind this portal orb. Now, you can't actually go through this portal orb specifically, but I'm assuming this portal orb is what's actually making the big portal work. Fun fact, the Wayseeker actually disappears from the red portal in the Exer village after you meet it for the second time. In the Order's armory, there are plenty of lockers with a bunch of gear inside, including the Exilum set you can obtain. If we now clip through this wall, we can actually find another locker that's floating outside, just like the lockers inside, where none of the items are interactable. I imagine this was used to easily copy-paste the lockers into the room, or maybe it was initially meant to be inside the armory, but wound up being dragged out and never deleted. When you first reach the residence sector, Hasatria will greet you, but eventually meeting a very unfortunate end. If we move the camera underneath the ground, we can see that the laser is actually already ready to be used right beneath our feet. When the laser needs to be called into the cutscene, it simply moves upwards really fast and then just as fast back underground. In the residence sector, there's this platform that you'll find across this collapsed bridge. If we fly over there, we'll be able to verify that this door is actually interactable, although it is locked. Going through the door reveals us a room that's enclosed, but the door can also not be unlocked from this side. It makes me wonder if this area will be accessible in a future update. In the Night Realm section of the Fragmented Dimension, there's a small structure with a cell inside. If we take the camera in the cell, we'll be able to find this weird skeleton with the shade shader on it, and what seems to be a Cheirosphere inside. The skeleton also seems to be wearing the Night Helmet. This is what the Fragments world looks like from the outside. During the actual game, you can find Dr. Ken inside this room. You can't disable any of these barriers and it's impossible to get inside. There's a hatch here that cannot be opened from either side, and here's what the room looks like from the inside. Here's a look at the barrier when seen from up close. In the botany wing, there's this interesting cloud-like texture that we never actually get to see. Not exactly out of bounds, but it is a very well-hidden secret. If you climb up this DNA statue, you can jump over here and dismantle this vent, go through it to find Gus, the cockatiel! An interesting fact about this room is that these windows are one-way see-through only. as from the other side they're all just blacked out. However, in the divarication side, if we try to go to the same room, we can see that it does not exist. Taking the camera through this wall will reveal some floor structure. You can also take a peek through this door to see an outside area. If you're ever curious what it looked like, well, here you go. An interesting tidbit is that on the divarication side, there's actually an extra wall over here. The rest of the room looks exactly the same, except with a lot less plants. There also seems to be an outlet way up here. Here we can see that the divarication dimension is located directly above the botanical wing. When you finally go through the portal that takes you to the Gate Arc Defense Facility, you'll be met with a group of gatekeepers, and who is presumably none other than Annette Garrick, the CEO and founder of the Gate organization. Let's take a closer look at these characters. Starting with the Jotun of the Fold, we can see he wears a white armor, as opposed to the black armor that all the other Jotuns wear throughout the game. The remaining gatekeepers seem to be wearing the same gear as usual, with the exception of this neophyte, who seems to be wearing a hat instead of his usual helmet. It's also interesting how the hat, the night vision goggles, and the gun aren't animated alongside his idle animation. The same applies to the witch's shotgun. The final character we're looking at is, once again, presumably Annette Garrick. If we take the camera inside her booth, we can see that she's actually just a pitch black figure, with only her glasses being textured. Now let's take a look at the outside. We can see more of this wall that spans across miles and miles. Unfortunately, we can't go up to it or to the other side because the world will just unload. If we take the camera directly underneath the spawn area, we can see that there's this platform underground, which could have initially been a placeholder platform for us to land on. Right before the portal that takes us back to our timeline, there's this gate. Unfortunately, there's really nothing behind it. Finally, directly above the building there's this black plane, but I'm not really sure what purpose it serves. From the shrine, if we fly left towards that iceberg, we'll actually be able to find a little surprise. Hidden behind the ice is none other than Gus, the cockatiel. Look at him. Another interesting thing to see here is the Gate Finial Observation Facility. This building has a broken keypad that cannot be fixed or used, and the door is obviously locked. Looking through the windows right above, you can see what seems to be a sort of a gate with what would be a keypad to activate it. If we go into this room, we can see that there's actually an entrance to that building, but the door is locked with no way of unlocking it. There's also what seems to be a TV, which I've wondered if you can package it. So to confirm this, let's clip through and see what happens. The door, we can verify it's not unlockable from the other side, and the TV can also not be packaged. On the other side there's this door with a keypad right next to it that you cannot interact with. Going through this door reveals that there is actually a gate like we thought, and also a keypad that presumably is going to be for our next update, where you can actually activate this keypad to open this gate and go deep underground to continue our story. This is what it looks like inside. Going any deeper just takes us outside of the map, into the water. Another interesting tidbit about this room is that the door actually doesn't look the same on this side as it does on this side. If we take the camera underground, we can see the Void Rift hiding in the skybox, waiting to be called after the final boss is defeated. There's also a second sun underneath the world that's casting a light on the bottom side of the ground. Here's what it looks like when the Wayseeker dives back in the water after being damaged. Once you defeat the boss, it'll leave behind some void cracks on the surface of the water, meaning if you try to dive inside, you'll just end up at the bottom of the ocean. However, we can see the beautiful space-like effect in this shader at the same time as the Wayseeker shrinks upon its death. Finally, a final explosion occurs to reveal a large void rift, which sadly we can't get close to as the world will simply unload, bringing us to the end of this video. I've always been fascinated by behind-the-scenes and out-of-bounds secrets in video games, and as such I had a lot of fun exploring every nook and cranny within Abiotic Factor, which is filled with so many interesting details. If you haven't played the game yet, I highly encourage you to, and let me know what you thought of these out-of-bounds secrets. What was your favorite? Was there something I missed? I'd love to hear your thoughts on it in the comments below. I hope you enjoyed this video as much as I did making it, and thank you so much for watching. See you next time.
Sometimes, Janet, you can be very pessimistic.
Oh, I'm sorry, Abe. I left my tap shoes in Flathill. Remember Flathill?